which really goes towards why I want to do these sessions and keep doing them. If you went to the taste I did before this, you would have seen this video already, or you may have heard about it, where Steve Fry got interviewed by my Irish commentator and asked about what would you say if he was confronted and he's in front of God. Has anybody watched this already? Yeah? Okay, so we're going to play that just to make a point. So.
Suppose what Oscar believed in as he died, in spite of your protestations, suppose it's all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him or it?
I will basically, what's known as theodicy, I think, I'll say, over cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? That's what I'd say.
And you think you're going to get in?
I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to get in on his terms. They're wrong. Now, if I died and it was Pluto, Hades, and if it was the 12 Greek gods, then I would have more trouble with it. Because the Greeks they didn't pretend not to be human in their appetites and in their capriciousness and in their unreasonableness. They didn't present themselves as being all-seeing, all-wise, all-kind, all-beneficent. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac. Utter maniac. Totally selfish. We have to spend our life on our knees to thank him. What kind of God would do that? Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects, whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It is simply not acceptable. So, atheism is not just about not believing not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he is monstrous, utterly monstrous, and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living, in my opinion.
That sure is the longest answer to that question that I ever got in this entire series.
Okay? Now, it's quite a strong video. And I'd like to have more time to kind of unpick some of the responses. And we're going to kind of do that through the rest of the session. But remembering the video to kind of set the context, because that's Stephen Fry. And he's just, he's open about what he thinks. God is capricious, whatever that means. God is mean, God is evil, he is not interested, and he's clearly talking about Christian God because he's making definitions in what he does there. But I wanted to share it because the reason why we put Decipher together is that we feel the faith as a whole is under attack. He's just one of the big players, he's a big actor, comedian, people know about him. But a lot of people are saying the same things or attacking those of the faith in the same way, who are lecturers in unis, or friends of other friends at college, or family who know you and think, oh, I'm going to get one over you and try and just grill you with questions. So if you ever come across it, you probably will come across it sooner or later. Yeah? And the whole reason why we set this and have this context is because we want you to know how to deal with some of these attacks, basically. How to talk about your faith intelligently. How to really make people know that faith is not just a crutch. And I say just because if someone said to me it's a crutch, I'm like, well, it's a better crutch to have than anything else. That's what I would say. People argue it's not a crutch, but actually it's a better one to have than anything else rather than the other options. But actually, it's very rational, very logical. So we're going to look at our faith with a question today. And that's what Decipher is all about. Equipping you not just to say the answer, but to know how you got to the answer. Because you can see in our presenter, he looks baffled. Did you see it? He really wasn't prepared for Stephen Fry and didn't do his homework. Because you can see he was shocked. But he goes around the country, Stephen Fry, doing talks in places, in venues, talking about his views, talking about the world, and he does it with passion, and he's also intellectual, so it's quite powerful if you've got nothing to rebut it with. So, the context in terms of why we're doing Decipher is because faith is under attack. And we need to be prepared to give an answer. And what we want to do basically is this: give you the tools to do just that. Simple as that. No, it's not that simple. But we just want to give you the tools to give an answer. How? First, by being critical. Critical about what we're thinking, so we're asking you to think about your thinking. Does that sound a bit confusing? If at any point you've got any questions, I think there's even a mic that's around here. We'll pass that around, so please wait till you got the mic to answer the question so we can record the audio and keep. Also, if there's a question that you think is a bit too sensitive, you don't want it recorded, keep a note of it. You can always ask me separately or outside of this. So don't think you have to keep anything in that you want to ask. Okay? But other than that, we want you to think about your thinking, being more critical, which is different to someone saying you just need to believe because you just need to believe. Why do I believe? Because the Bible says so. Actually, we need more than the Bible says so in this day and age. And if somebody in church isn't asking you that, someone outside of it will be saying, the Bible doesn't work for me, it's only need to come from a different angle. Why do you believe what you believe? Using scriptural guidance to do that, so we'll be looking at scriptures to do that. And also real life application. So when we're talking about stuff, we're always trying to use real life examples. We want your examples to come into this as well. Because there's no point in knowing all this stuff in our head, but actually you don't know how that applies to you in your life. It needs to get from just having understanding to I can walk this out daily and it works for me. Yeah? That's the faith that we need. That's the understanding we need. So what's the point? We want you to cherish Christ in your heart, and we want you to enjoy the scriptures, and we want you to know and feel confident that you can actually share them and know what they're saying. We want you to be able to talk about your faith confidently and don't feel that you have to shy or go in a corner when that conversation. Have you ever had a conversation with others there and you kind of shrink? You don't want to be involved because you're thinking, I'm ready for that yet. We want you to be ready for it and let you know that you can be ready for it and prepare you to get to that place. So that's about engaging and making a difference in your circle of influence. Now, all of you have got a circle of influence. All of you go somewhere to learn or to work or to look after somebody. That's your circle of influence where you'll know. It's that simple. But having an impact there, because if you realise a lot of the time today it seems as though people are influencing Christians more than it used to be the other way around. And to fulfill the greatest commandment. And does anybody know what the greatest commandment is? Don't need a mic for this, just shout it out. I know there's some Christians in here, I'm going to walk around until we get the answer. Come on. Come on. How many times do we go in the circle before you tell me what it is? Sorry? You go in there, you started. Carry on. To love God, yeah. Stretch it. Yep. 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 Let's help them out. Mark 12:30. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Decipher is about readdressing the balance, so you can actually do that with your mind as well and engage. Because I wasn't a Christian all my life, and I know outside of the church, a lot of people look at the church and think it's just a group of mindless people who, if it was more intelligent, they wouldn't even be in church. You're not comfortable with that understanding, but I've been outside of it long enough to know, I didn't grow up in church, that lots of people think that. Especially if we can't share it intelligently, they think it even more so. So something like this is critical. I can't underestimate how much this is really needed. Yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On this, alright? Now, in our culture, just in society in general, when someone says the word faith, what do people think of? How do you think, what's the definition of faith? If you say, I have faith, you think, all right. If you say, I have faith, what do you think people hear when you say that? Or how would you, what does faith mean?
Anybody want to answer? Before I actually went to church, I actually thought that faith was actually a chance. I seen like a coin, when you flip a coin, either jumps on your head or a tail. So it's either a chance of you getting something or a chance of you not getting something. It's faith. You have no control over it. You have no control over it.
So faith is just kind of like hoping that you call heads, you're going to get heads. Yeah? Anybody else?
I see it. Trusting the in something that you can't see.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah? What about, all right, if we, we're all believers, we're in a church, but somebody who's out there who, you're Stephen Fry, what does he think faith is? How would, if you asked him what is faith?
From somebody's perspective who doesn't go to church, I would say they see it as being held down, like being bound in chains and sort of like not fully being able to express themselves properly because it's a type of manipulation, put it that way. Because I've spoken to a few people, and if I speak to them about Christianity or whatever, they would be under the impression that it's just a basic manipulation for us to sort of be systematic, basically. When really it's the worldly kind of stuff that's systematic and religious and stuff like that. So that's the perspective that I think that other people have basically in terms of faith. So you sort of bound basically.
Sure.
Or under manipulation.
Thank you.
I feel that people's perspective of faith is that it's wishful thinking, fairy tale, unrealistic. So that's how I see people see faith outside of Christianity.
Yeah, sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say also, I think when people who aren't Christians or don't have a faith, when you say the word faith, they see it as like religion. Something that's dogmatic, something that's oppressive, something that controls people, and as my friend said, something that's you're manipulated by, you don't really have any freedom with. That's how I think they see it.
I'm pushing towards something, but you have something to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, because you do hear people that don't believe in a God say that they have faith, but I think they've got hope and faith mixed up, because I think that with faith, it's actually knowing in your heart that something is real, whereas hope is kind of like that you're wishing. So I think somebody who's in the world and doesn't know God, I think their faith is really just hope, because it's not really based on anything.
That's fine.
I actually think that from the people that I speak to, what I actually think is everybody believes in God, but I think that once you believe in God and accept that He is real, you then become accountable to Him, and that's what people don't like. They don't like the rules, the laws, etc. So if you listen to New Age spiritualism, everybody has faith, but they are taking out what they want. And so, because you can't live without hope, everyone hopes for something to get better, or whatever the circumstances may be in. So I do believe people have faith, but they put it within their own contexts as they want to accept it.
Yeah. Now, okay, the reason I asked the question is, I'm getting to why we're here. What's the point? And what I'm pushing at is, do we understand what faith means? When the Bible talks about faith, what does a Christian have faith in? You ask people in the world, even among Christians, there's an idea that has kind of spread through all our minds that faith, there's two ways that you can know things. There's reason, there's like stuff that makes sense, the facts, There's that, and then there's faith. For everything else, for things that you can't know, then there's faith. For things that you can't prove, you just have faith. And so there's this idea that someone like Stephen Fry would probably, I don't know his exact view on this, but he would probably say, faith is the opposite of reason. Faith is the opposite of what's logical, And so really, what it means is believing something where there's no evidence. Or even if there's evidence, believing it anyway, And the reason why we're doing something like this is, that is not what faith is. That's when the Bible talks about faith, it's not at all talking about something that doesn't make sense. It's talking about something that is reasonable to have because it's based on things that have happened. It's not just having faith that, there's an invisible fish floating above my head. It's faith more like saying, I have faith in my friend because he's come through for me. I know I can depend on him. So, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. A lot of times we leave the mind out because we think faith is opposite to your head. When actually God is God of every part of us. And He wants to be God of our minds too. And so that's why this kind of thing is essential. And so that's just kind of a side point, but
good point.
Yeah.
Good point. And you're going to be seeing that more and more as we do the session and as we do more sessions. We want to readdress that balance because not only do people believe that, but it's you see it reinforced in some churches as well. Because when you ask questions, you almost knock back. And actually, God wants questions. The Word tells us, come, let us reason. He wants us to be reasonable. He wants us to ask questions and go deeper and know that what we believe is real, not wishful thinking. So we're going to do that and unpack that, and you'll see how that works and how we have tools to actually help us do this. So the emphasis is loving God with our mind, our logic, our reasoning, our everything. A few things we want you to remember though while we do this is that when you're actually helping people and answering questions, remember that you're talking to someone. Don't just answer the question. There's a questioner and they're coming from somewhere. Often we could jump in because it's another notch in the belt, or I know what I'm talking about, or I've got God with me so I know the answers and you're going to listen to me. But actually we need to have a bit more humility and realise, you know what, I don't know even sure where you're coming from yet, so let me probe a bit more. The questions are coming from somewhere, so don't be scared to ask a question. And I've asked you a question, and a good one to start with is, why do you ask that question? And the question we've got today is hell fair? It's quite a deep question. Big question. A lot of stuff tucked in there. You could answer it in other ways as well, like, is God just? Is God good? There's different ways you could kind of tweak it, and loads of other questions fall out of that, and we'll be looking at some of it. But today's question is hell fair? So if someone said to you that question, you've got to think where they're coming from. So as we do it, always keep remembering that the person's coming from somewhere. I remember hearing somebody say that, is saying that you can actually win an argument but lose the person. And we don't want to get to that point, especially as people who follow God. It's better you lose the argument and you have another opportunity at a later point. Really is. Because a man offended, it's nearly impossible to win. So keep that open, keep that communication open.
And before we jump into this, all right, that is an absolutely essential thing. 1 Peter 3:15 says, set the Lord apart in your hearts and always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks about the hope that you have within you. And then there's so we hear the defense part and, having a reason, but there's a tag on the end that says, and always do so with gentleness and respect. And so that's the heart attitude, it's so easy to just be defensive. When really, Paul says, knowledge without love puffs us up. And that's the thing, when you get so full of knowledge, you just love winning arguments, And actually, many of us have probably been in that place, and we know Christians that are like that maybe. But it's always from a heart of love. And it's always from a heart of, not just how can I win this argument, how can I win this person, like we're saying, and how can I help them? And so, these are the things that we got to keep in mind the whole time when we're discussing these questions. It's not just to get knowledge. We want to know the right stuff, of course. But the point is to clear obstacles away so that people can see Jesus for who he is. And that person might be me. It might be us. And it's other people that we want to help as well. So,
thank you. So there's so much more we could unpack about that, the basics of even your approach. But we're going to do some of that unpacking, actually jumping into the question now and sharing that, because we could really be here all night doing this, but we don't have all night. But I want to jump into it and give us a taste of that. So we're really training on our feet. We're doing it on the job with a question and just fleshing it out together. So, the question, is hell fair? Very big question. Is hell fair? Now when we answer that question, there are certain things we can think about, and this works with any question. Is there assumptions that are sitting in this question?
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw it out to you. Yeah? Give you the mic. And I just want you to kind of maybe take a minute and think about what assumptions may be sitting within this question. What is the person assuming who actually asked this question? Where are they coming from? What's behind it? So if you've got some ideas, throw them out. I'll give you the mic.
I think in keeping in context with the Stephen Fry video, in terms of, he said he thought that when he got to the afterlife, if he met someone like Hades, or if he met someone, more like the Greek mythology type of individuals, he would think, well, that makes more sense. So my point is that he would think hell is more fair and just, or yeah, exactly.
I was saying because they're more open about how they would sort of carry themselves, basically, instead of it being like a position where if you're to God and God's there sort of claiming to be some kind of supreme and all being, and he's there, and he's things like bone cancer and all of that stuff. Yeah. Whereas the bad people are not trying to be anything but bad. So he's saying that it's better being with them than somebody who's trying to be
it's
deceiving, basically. That's what he's saying. But
yeah. I mean, I was going to say
something along the line. Sorry, because what it is, a lot of people in the world, they when bad things happen, they sort of think to themselves, well, why is this happening? How can it happen to me? And I think that's where they're coming from when they're asking whether it's fair. Do you know what I mean? Because they can't understand if there is a God, then why do bad things happen? So that's kind of where I would think they would think, is hell fair, basically.
Before you respond, because I want to make this as clear as possible. Now, when we're talking about the assumption, see, this is a discipline that we're going to have to learn, and that's what part of Decipher is about as well, is thinking about our thinking and how we process it and work things out and what we're really talking about. It's a deep question, but in terms of the assumption, all we're really asking is, why would somebody ask this question? What would drive the question? So you could assume, an assumption, it could be that the person's been hurt by something that's happened within their life. Or the assumption could be, I'm a good person. That's a very clear assumption. It could be, I'm a good person. So really what they're saying is hell isn't fair, but they're asking you the question, is hell fair? And the assumption behind that could be, I'm a good person, so hell doesn't make sense to me. Because their understanding is, if I'm good, then hell doesn't apply to me. Then you get into the whole thing about what does good mean. But we're not looking at that far, just looking at the assumption. So that could be one, if that helps in terms of looking at the assumption. So that's what we're asking. If you can't think of any now, don't worry, because there's some that we're going to pick out, and we're going to do it more so. But this is a practice we want you to get used to, because it's not something we often do. We just jump into the answer, and then say, this is the answer to your question. And we pray about it and hope that God's helped us to give him the answer to the question. But actually, sometimes you have to stop and say, actually, why are you even asking me that question? So that's where it comes from, the assumption. So did you want to respond? Or anybody got another one? A clear assumption that you can see within it.
Well, if I'm thinking about the video, an assumption about Stephen Fry himself is he's a gay man who has struggled with his homosexuality. Gone as far as to say in previous interviews that he was disgusted with himself because he's a big man. Why would he want another man? All that kind of stuff. The assumption I would make, knowing his background, him asking that question, is about his own struggle. So that I think there's something behind knowing who you're talking to as well. And a lot of the time, like you said at the beginning, some of the challenges we get are from the people closest to us. So it's about processing the question before you answer, I think. But that would be a personal assumption, I think.
Wonderful.
One assumption, well, two assumptions that come to mind. One is someone's asking the question, if God is loving, our Father, he loves me so much, why would he create a place where people perish? So that's one assumption. Second assumption is I just imagine the scenario of someone being at a funeral of a loved one who they're fully aware that loved one broke every single commandment. But Uncle Jerry was good at heart.
Good man.
He was a good man at heart. Yeah, he broke all the commandments, but he was a good man at heart. So surely he's going to be judged by his heart, not by the things that he did.
He had his ways, but God
He had his ways, but he was good at heart. So, is hell fair? Another thing is as well that it's not my fault that Adam sinned. Well, what's this about being born in sin and shaped in iniquity? What's that about? It's not my fault. It's not my fault that I'm going to hell. So that's another assumption there.
Yeah. Those are all really important at the heart of this. And I wanted to express it in maybe another way to think about assumptions is for every question that's being asked, like you said, it can come from any different place that person is. 10 people might ask the same words of a question, but come from 10 different angles, completely. And, you can't know that. You can't know what a person's background is. You can only get to that through getting to know them and talking to them. And that's where that, the last how was, asking people questions, drawing it out of them. But just another way to think about the assumptions is, what is being taken for granted in this question? So for instance, if I say, just to get your heads around like what the process is here. If I ask you the question, have you stopped beating your wife? Yeah, what am I taking for granted in that question? I mean, there's no good way you can answer that. If you say yes, it means you were beating her and now you stopped. If you say no, then you're still doing it. But either way, what am I taking for granted? That you beat your wife, right? So, I mean, that's just a really simple, obvious example, but a question like, is hell fair? What am I taking for granted about the way that life is to even be able to ask that question? One of the things I'm assuming that if there's a God, he's good. That's one assumption, okay? And like Stephen Fry, clearly he's not talking about Allah, because that's not a problem in Islam. Hell's not a problem in Islam. It's only a problem when you talk about a God of love and mercy. So, okay, first of all, okay, you're talking about the Christian God. All right. Now we're just refining down what is it that we're actually talking about. You know? Because before you have a conversation, you got to know what you're talking about. Yeah? And so that's the process. You know, it's tough. But this is thinking about your thinking. And getting down to what's being taken for granted here. Yeah?
Okay. It's wonderful. So you understand how even the way we're going through this is probably different to what you're used to. But going through the process, really thinking it out. We don't want to jump in. We could jump into that answer quite easy and say, is hell fair? As a Christian, I could say, yeah. Yeah. But then if someone turns to me and says, well, how? Now I've got to explain myself. That's why we're here, to see if we can explain ourselves when it comes back at us, because it will. Yeah? So, is hell fair? We've been looking at the assumptions. A few that we came up with, and mentioned one already, is I'm a good person. The other one is I have a say. So someone might say, is hell fair? Because they're thinking, don't I get a look in? Don't I have a say in this? So they could be assuming that, I know God is God, but He gave me a choice. And if I don't want to go to hell, my choice should be taken on board. Bit of a quirky way of saying it, but yeah? So, do I have a say? So that whole thing there about God also being over us and making decisions and being comfortable with being accountable to somebody who transcends us and is beyond us. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that idea. You know, it's like when we were children and our parents made decisions for us that we didn't necessarily have any power in. But that's how it was. So how much more with God? But that's an assumption there that the person has a say. And the other assumption, we've already said, maybe God isn't that good then. God cannot be good in such conditions if He says actually He's created a hell. Hell is not a nice place. So hell can't be fair. And it seems even more unfair as we get further on. We're going to unpack it to say, but actually it's more unfair on the surface than it looks until we really interrogate the question. But we'll get to that. But there's another thing we need to do as well if we're speaking to somebody, and that's we need to define the terms of the question. Because we're saying, is hell fair? But then you've got to take a step back and say, well actually, are we talking about the same hell? Have you been in a conversation where you talk for 10, 15 minutes, and then you get to the end of the conversation and you realise we're actually talking about two different things? Have you been in that situation? I have, especially if you're running there, you know, with all passion, and when it comes to religious debates and talks and two men on the street going and they're there for hours, and like, they're not even talking about the same thing, because no one stopped to say, actually, what do you mean by that? So, just throw out quickly, in terms of hell, how is hell presented to us from the world, from society? Just give us some ideas that you see.
Does hell make sense? My first thinking was, not now, but before. If God created everything, then why did He create evil in the first place? If we're all supposed to be good, He wants us to be good, why set us up for failure? And in that respect, then to me, hell didn't make any sense. I just thought it was, you know, like the trick question. Yeah.
It's a valid question. Hold the question, because we're going to get to answering it. But it's slightly different from what I was asking. I know, it's alright, but at the end of that discipline, we've got to stay on track and try and do the journey together. So you kind of got ahead, but it's a valid question, so hold that. It's a very good question. But what I'm asking is, when we think about hell, what are the things that are presented to us?
Fire.
Just throw them out, you don't need the mic, just throw them out. What? Fire?
Eternal suffering.
Eternal suffering. Torture. Pitchfork. Demons. Hot. Anything else?
No way back.
No way back. Satan. You want to throw one in there? Anybody else want to? What about the world? What did we get shown in films and cartoons and some of the things you said? But what else did we get?
We get one each shoulder before you go.
Oh, the demon and the angel thing. Yeah, okay. But specifically with hell, I mean, one of the sides of it as well, which is similar, is that the way it's often presented, it seems a bit cool. We had this conversation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's that quote: "Go to heaven for the weather, go to hell for the company."
Wow.
As in, heaven's nice and sunny, but all you're doing is, playing a harp in the clouds.
Yeah, boring.
In hell, you get to do all the fun stuff. You get all the, the gun, you name it. Pick up your favorite rap CD. That's the stuff you get to do. You get to live that, and that's the kind of, I think people got that image that everyone's in hell having. They're doing the bad stuff, but it's the fun stuff, really.
Well, we tend to get that bad is cool.
Yeah.
Even if you go back to school, the person who was playing out in Trivington and being kind of bad, everyone thought they were kind of cool because they were a bit of a rebel. That kind of built into society, and if you take that to its logical end, it's like, what are we telling people? If that's the kind of society we're in, it's good to be bad. A lot of the stars, the celebrities who are out there, who've just gone off the rails and speaking all sorts of madness and nonsense, making millions. Why? Because they're exploiting that very thing. I'm brutal, I don't care, say what I want, not accountable to anybody, making my money, no one can tell me anything, don't care where I go. That kind of mentality, it seems cool, and it seeps into our culture and our society quite a bit. And it can kind of have a tinge on how we see bad things. And the logical end of that, we say, but also as Christian, hell is a consequence. So how is that being presented to us? It's very important in terms of how it's being presented to us. But if we're having a conversation, as we are now, and someone's asked the question, is hell fair? At least just take the time to pick out these things. Think, are we talking about the same hell? Are we talking about the same thing? For us, we're going to be very clear and say, in terms of defining the term hell, we are talking about the biblical one. Now there's more than one. So again, you could still be talking about a different hell. Because the Bible uses hell in different places, for the words translated in different ways. So we're going to look at a few of them now. There's 3 there. Sheol, Hades, Gehenna. Have you heard of those 3? Hades. Okay, and place of the dead, Sheol. The Greek term of the similar thing is Hades, and then you have the last one, which is Gehenna. Jesus spoke about it the most, and he actually used a refuge place. I don't know if it's in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem, where they used to burn the rubbish, and he used that as a marker to say that's what Gehenna is like. That's where we get the whole imagery about burning and firing, where they burn the refuse. And in this question, to be clear, we're talking about that hell which is Gehenna, rather than somewhere where the dead people just go. Not necessarily to punishment. It's used that way sometimes in the Bible, but more Gehenna is talking about the punishment, everlasting punishment. Yeah? So we are talking about Gehenna. But we run into another problem, because there's one thing to say that hell is real, but then to say it's everlasting. And that makes it even more tough. It's everlasting. It's like, okay, you've done a crime. You go to the court, you get done for the crime, and the judge says you're going to prison. And you say, how long am I going to prison? He says, forever. Like, forever? I'm going to be coming out at some point. Why would I be going forever? It's like, it almost doesn't compute with the crime. So you've got to answer the question in terms of why is such a big sentence handed down? What is going on? And we do have answers for that, which we're going to touch on. But Jesus was talking about a hell that was everlasting. He talked about it more than anybody else. And I want you to just think about this. How does that make you feel? Now this is Jesus. You know the Jesus, the nice Jesus? The angelic Jesus? The blue eyes Jesus, the kind of, you know that Jesus where everything's hunky-dory and he speaks softly and hugs you when you need a hug. This actually, the same Jesus spoke some real harsh and tough realities, and one of them, the biggest one the world has a problem with, is this one about hell. So in a word, how does that make you feel? Just hell, what is it? Being a term nervous, yeah? Anyone else?
I would say you think to yourself, have you done enough to not be rejected?
Have you done enough? Interested? Okay, anyone else?
Start to think if it's unfair. I'm starting to side with the man that asked the question.
You and Stephen Fry, yeah? Actually, yeah, it does sound a bit over the top. But that shows me your understanding exactly what it's saying. So that's fine. There's responses to it, but that shows me you understand it. 'Cause if you really understand it, you should be uncomfortable.
Yeah, this is a question you can't. Nobody can deal lightly with it, because we're not talking just about Jimmy Savile. We're just, we're gonna mention him in a minute, but we're not just talking about Hitler. We're not just talking about the people that everybody knows are really bad. We're talking about me. This stuff is in me, And when this warning doesn't just go out to them, it goes out to me too, and it goes out to my family, to my friends, and so it's a question that nobody can. Like, if you don't feel it, then you haven't wrapped your head around it yet, And so this is something that, in any discussion, I think we got to tread very carefully, very lightly, because it's a very serious matter, and that's the way that Jesus talked about it. Jesus didn't just kind of like, you're going to hell. He was never like that. He always gave it as a loving warning, And so, absolutely. I mean, if you're starting to feel like, then maybe it's hitting home.
Yeah. Then you're understanding what we're really talking about. If you can kind of look at it and think, it's hell. You haven't really grasped it yet. And if you got friends and family asking you about it, you believe Jesus, didn't he talk about hell? How are you going to respond to that? What are you going to say to them? I'm going to need 2 quick minutes. Just talk to the person next to you and try and come up with an answer for what you would give for friends or family in terms of hell and Jesus speaking about it. They're interrogating you saying, how can that be right? Can you think of a good reason why? Actually, there is a point why he tells us and why is actually a good thing to do. Why it was a good thing for him to tell us about hell. Take 2 minutes with somebody and have that quick conversation. As I said at the start, there's warm in here, and I said that you can move as and when you want to get drinks, fruit. You want to do that at this point, please? Alright, so responses. Why? Someone shout them out. Why would it be a good thing for Jesus to talk about hell?
Well, I discussed with fellows here, and we put it in different way of saying it. Different way of saying it. For example, say if you explain to a family, like if you have kids or things like that, you've been in a house, you've got a fireplace, and yes, it's fire, it's hot, you know it's hot, but as a parent, you tell the child not to go because you can get burned. So you inform the child that you can get burned, but also, so it's different side of the road. It's there to keep you warm. So on top of that, it's there burning you, but just if you stay back away from it, so you do the good thing, you'll be warm. So that's the way we explain it.
Okay. Great. Anybody had anything different or say?
We were saying, makes the warning, like if you didn't tell us, you just basically don't know us. It just makes, tell us.
True. Thank you. One more, and we'll move.
And also, it kind of gives us a reason in some respects to follow him and listen to his teachings. It's kind of like just the law of the land. I mean, you don't go around murdering and stealing, you don't want to go to prison. You know what I mean? So it kind of keeps you on that right path, doing the right thing. So Jesus is teaching us about it. It was like to say, like, look, if you don't follow my teachings or my way or know me, this is the consequence. You know what I mean? It's like a sort of almost like a push to the right direction, more or less.
Wonderful. Great responses. And you've hit it on the nail. Answer. It's a loving thing to do to warn somebody of an oncoming danger. It's unloving not to say something. And the Bible is very clear. It tells us that God made hell for the devil and his angels. Now we know because of sin and what's going on, men will be going there, women will be going there, but that wasn't why God created it. We need to make that very clear. But because they were, Jesus loved us. And he had to tell us. Now he could have been, I don't want to say anything because I might hurt their feelings. Don't want to say anything because they might not like me. Don't want to say anything because they might not follow me. I don't think that even entered his mind. It's a reality, it's a truth. I'm telling you because I love you. That's why I'm telling you. People don't tend to link the message of hell with love. They don't, do they? It's fire and brimstone and you better do it or you're going to burn. Scare people into heaven, see if that works. Doesn't work, but people try it. So, you've got to really think about that and just really know that it was a loving thing to do. He loved us. And we do the same thing now in this world. We warn your loved ones about dangers coming. So we know all that. We kind of looked at the assumptions, looked a bit at definitions in terms of hell. We're talking about one particular hell. Now we can get to responses. And maybe different responses. Which is just basically a reaction to something. So you're responding to what somebody's asked you when we're talking about a response. Which is different from saying an answer. Can I make that clear? To respond means you've listened to the person. You know where they're coming from now. And your response is in relation to what they've asked you. Which is that discipline where I was saying, I'm asking you a question, you give me an answer, but it's not an answer to the question that I gave you. That means you didn't really listen to what I was saying or understand it. So it's important we unpick all that before we even get to a response. So, I'm going to bring these all up. One response, is hell fair? Well, yes, because the world is corrupt and hell provides justice. How does that sound? Might be difficult because we said it's everlasting, but if you move back to the side for a minute and just think about consequence. Think about prison. Think about where we are. If you knew somebody could come and kill and murder and do what they wanted, and there was no consequence, would you be comfortable with that? Would anybody here want to be comfortable with that? No. If you watch the news tomorrow and you find out about some guy who's a serial rapist and the judge says, that's okay, he's my friend, let him walk. It's an extreme example, but would you be okay with that? So we all understand the concept of punishment. We all understand the concept of consequence. There needs to be. And when you think about some of the examples, I mean, Hitler's, talk about World War II, talk about slavery. Jimmy Savile's probably the most recent one, which is a very poignant one because he never got locked up. And you know how much crimes have come out at the moment? He never saw a day in prison. So for some people, he got away with it. But if there's justice beyond the grave, he's not getting away with it. Now it goes deeper than just being justice because of what he's done. But the nutshell is we understand punishment, we understand consequence, and we need to know and believe that actually there is consequence for the things we do. And somebody's watching over that who isn't the law of the land, who isn't somebody who's not perfect and understand everything, but somebody who knows it all. So can judge and judge justly. And then you got the other side of it. What's the alternative? If there's no punishment, no consequence, even in the world we live in now, what's the alternative? Let's say we remove that and then we still have a world. How are you going to handle it? How are you going to deal with it?
You have to live in fear.
People would take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, but aren't they doing that before God anyway? They want to take their life into their own hands. They want to take their living into their own hands. But then when this life is done, they want to get into heaven. The man that want God, or they want to get into heaven. It just doesn't add up. What is the alternative is a good question to ask if someone says, okay, then if there's no punishment, there's no consequence, then what do you suggest? So that's one response, which deals with the punishment side of it. But it goes a bit deeper. Because you can say, someone says to you, I get it. Punishment, I get it. We need to have punishment. But hell is eternal. So it's one thing for God to have a consequence for not being with him, but why does it have to be forever? Are you feeling that question a bit more now? Is it really starting to sink in a bit now?
That's not the same question. So, yeah, you need a consequence, but does it need to be, well, that's saying, yeah, how's a consequence, but does it need to be eternal for it to be an effective consequence?
It's basically saying, does the sentence fit the crime? Would that be right, Ian? Does the sentence fit the crime, is what we're asking. And if you think about it on the surface, you probably say no. But there's a way of looking at it which we don't see. And it pulls out another problem with the way that we see something. I can see you got it, Mike. I know you want to share on this one. So I'm going to ask you to share on the next point, which is about sin. So Ian's going to share a bit about actually how we can tackle this and make it more reasonable. To say, actually, yeah, God's got a point, and hell forever. There's a reason why that is the case. So,
I didn't actually have anything to say, but...
Are you sure?
Yeah, I mean...
Give me an example.
Yeah, we can. I mean, in the question of why is it got to be eternal? All right, so we understand punishment makes sense. If there's a God, God has to ensure justice. We all expect that. We all, if there's a God, then we expect him to punish evil. That's what God is. He is justice, right? So we get that. But then,
especially if he's a good God.
Yeah. Yeah.
If he's a good God, he's got to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then, no matter how extreme the example gets, even the oldest person around only lives 100 roughly years, right? How much evil can you do in 100 years? Well, a lot, right? If you're Stalin, if you're Hitler, you can do a lot of evil. Thank God they didn't live longer than they did, or they would have gone on doing more evil. But it's still a limited amount, right? Doesn't it seem like? And so, why should it be eternal? This is what we've already said. It seems kind of like, out of all proportion to the crime that's been committed. But this is the next point. What are we talking about when we talk about sin? Is it just breaking a rule? Is that all it is? Or really, is it, I don't know, you're going to go into this anyway, so I'll just get into it. But that's the question is, okay, to understand hell, you have to understand what sin is. You've got to really think about, okay, what are we talking about when we say sin? And that's one of the other concepts. When you say the word sin to somebody, any person you find on the street, what do they hear? Crime? Find out, what are you talking about? When I talk about sin, this is what the Bible's talking about when it talks about sin. So, take it away. Well, okay. There's a number of different words. The Bible's written in Hebrew and Greek mostly, and there's a number of different words that we translate into sin in English. And there's everything from, there is the thing of breaking a rule, crossing a line, yeah? There's also not matching up to a standard. There's also missing the mark. And actually, the English word sin comes from, it's an English word that originally referred to an archer when he shoots an arrow to miss the mark. And so sin is more than just breaking rules. It's to do with something that has been ripped in the fabric of the way God designed the universe. It's something so deep and fundamental that most of the time we don't see it for what it is. And so here's an example to bring out a little bit more of the seriousness of sin, what it is when we sin.
Okay, so to help you to think about this, because I can see you thinking intensely now, which is good. Think about a relationship. And then think about a couple, man or woman that met. They've only been going out for a while, say 6 months, and then one of them finds out the other one's cheating. One of them's going to be hurt. So say the woman finds out the man's cheating, yeah, because the man kissed somebody else and whatever. She's going to be hurt. We all agree on that. Take the same couple now, they've been married for about 30 years. Everything was fine. And then she finds out that he's cheating. She's still going to be hurt. But the hurt is going to be much greater. Because it's 30 years. It's investment. It's time. And what makes it bigger is the level of trust that was built up. And the intimacy that was built up. So that crying now, actually, even though it's the same thing, say it was a kiss. It was a kiss for those who were together for 6 months. It was a kiss for those who actually were together for 30 years. But for the one to 30 years, it could be more devastating. Just because of what was at risk and what was actually in place. So the intimacy that was broken was a much more bigger intimacy to be broken over the 30 years. And more to lose. Now I'm just talking about an example where someone's been with someone else for 6 months and you compare it with 30 years. Take a lead now with that and think about the intimacy between God and those He created. Do you see that? Can you see that jump? Like how no one's closer to you than God. He's your creator. But then, in some respect, we're at the fall, we turn and says, you know what, we want to do our own thing, God. So to cheat on God, or to go out of His will, or do something, is so intensely grave that we don't even fully understand it. Even me, having a kind of grip of this, I don't think I fully fathom it. I don't think anyone alive has fully fathomed what really happens when we say, you know what, God, thanks, but no thanks. Or take it to the other level, which is what the Bible says when we walk from here, where we become rebellious and angry, or even to the point of Stephen Fry, he starts calling him names. And we get to the condition of, we are God. We say what we want to say. We form our own destiny and all that kind of talk that we have nowadays. So the level of trust that was broken has made the same act at different levels have different effects. 6 months, it was a big thing. I was only with them for 6 months. You know, we didn't like each other that much. Or 30 years, I really loved the person. I never thought to cheat on me. We got kids, we got family, we got this, we got this. And then you got God who knows you, who will know you for life, know you eternally. And then you say, no thanks.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, Karen.
Karen.
Just another example, in case you didn't get that one, there's one more we can talk about in a different way. But should I go into that, or do you want to jump on what I just said first?
Yeah, just add something to that is to round up, about sin. Most people think about it in terms of there's some judge millions of miles away in some country I've never heard of who made up some rules and I'm breaking them. But he's so far away that it doesn't really matter. And that's me when I sin. When actually, it's more like, a better way to think about it is betrayal. Betrayal of, more like betraying your own mother. when you break that trust, it's something that's been broken that's much deeper than just some little rule, you know. It's and so really what I want to get across when I'm talking to somebody about what sin is this is about a broken relationship. Not just a rule. This is about, the rules are important because of the relationship. Yeah? So when I sin, what it is I'm breaking the trust and breaking the intimacy with my maker. And there's nothing that could be more fundamental, you know, that could be more, fundamental than that betrayal. Yeah.
There's no bigger rift than that. And if you're going to again bring it back to examples, if you've been with somebody and they cheated with you and you was hurt, you know that kind of hurt. Some of us are younger and not married, others who are older being married, and then to have someone cheat, the betrayal, the anger. Not necessarily because you want to do anything bad to them, but just because they did that. You can't even put that into words. Another example of that is looking at the crime severity dependent on the one who is offended. Now, when I say that, I always use the example of the law. We have the Queen's law in this land. You know, if you do a crime and you end up going into the Queen's court, actually it's against the Queen that you committed the crime and not the person that you actually did that crime. If you didn't know that, that's how it is. So, take fraud, you're dealing with finance, and you're going into the Queen's court and you're being sentenced, it's actually against the Queen that you committed that crime. Because her head's on the money, her head's still like head of state, because she still has a position here. So the law is wrapped around that. So we understand the concept of being under authority. So even though I took the money from Barclays, I now got to answer to the Queen. Yeah? And if I do a crime against a different person in terms of authority and statute, it has different consequences. Say if someone's coming to visit Birmingham, I don't know, a runner, an athlete, and then I do something, I hit them, I punch them, whatever, that's going to be on the news. That's going to have, consequences. But let's say it's royalty, or the Queen, somebody of a much bigger, or the President, Obama. Someone comes, and I punch them. Do you know the consequences are probably going to be different? Because the level of the sentence almost is attached also to the one who you've offended. Do you see that? So the consequence is also in relation to who you have actually offended. So some things they can skirt over. Other things, we're like, no, that needs a greater punishment, because we need to set an example and a precedent that nobody hits the president, nobody hits the Queen, nobody hits. Do you see what I mean? So if that's the case with them, how much more God sets a precedent? How much more when God, through sin, the one that we offend, has to turn around and say, okay, now what do I do about this? Because I am God. I'm not your friend. I am God. I'm holy. I'm perfect. I'm righteous. Yes, I'm loving, but I'm also good. So I can't turn a blind eye. I need to deal with this. And if you was God, you've got to lay out punishment, a sentence. And it's not in relation to what you've done. It's in relation to the fact that He is God. The reason why I share that is when it comes to the whole thing about being eternal and God setting it that way. Again, He never made hell for men and women, humans. But there's people who don't want God, so what's He going to do with them? They've rebelled. What's He going to do? He's got to do something with them. So that's where hell comes in as a place for them, and the whole torment, the whole thing. Even not being with God is going to be a torment. But do you get the point? Do you see what I'm saying? So the crime is leveled up to the status of the person who's actually been offended, not the crime itself. That's when we say all sin is sin. That makes sense in that respect, because actually it's the one who you're offending that makes it grave, not what you've done. Yeah?
It just, if we're thinking about how do we learn how to not only answer our own questions but help other people using pictures, analogies, which are images to explain something that's harder to understand. That is an excellent way to go. I mean, and that is such a good example because you can use anything like football. We know that this is how it works. The level of the seriousness of the foul depends on who it is. If you tackle a defender or whatever, you might get a yellow card. If it's really bad, you might get a red card. You tackle the ref, you get sent off straight away. You get a ban. Happens again, you might get kicked out of the league or something. So everybody understands those kinds of things, and I think that then you just got to say, okay, extend that to infinity. You're dealing with God. Remember, God he's the ruler of the universe. He's the one that created everything. And that's who you are betraying. Think about that. So, I think that's a really useful way.
Very brave. Because then you see it from God's standpoint, not ours. And then you have an understanding of sin in a correct way, because then you realize the gravity of it. So there is one more big problem though. Is God still loving? Well, we can say yeah, because he's a good God. He has to deal with it. He has to have a consequence. There must be justice in the universe. If a judge is a judge that you want when you're doing a case, or no, if someone's bad and you know they're going to court, you want them to be a good judge, don't you? You don't want a corrupt judge. You want a good judge. So if it's the mafia, they're not walking in there and coming out because the judge is being corrupt and part of the scam. You're like, no, I know if this person gets locked up, they're going to prison for a long time because he's a good judge. That was part of Stephen Fry's problem with the Christian God as well. He said he's calling himself a good God, but then the world is the way it is. So you can kind of see where it's coming from with the argument. Other gods don't necessarily sell themselves as a good God. They're just God. So one thing I would point out, that God is still loving, definitely. And most of us would say that if you ask somebody, do you want to go to heaven? Majority of the time people would say yeah. But wanting to go to heaven and then wanting to be with God is two different things. Two different things. We haven't even talked about heaven and how people see and interpret it like we did with hell. But for most people, yeah, heaven sounds great. I want to go to heaven. Wonderful. But do they want God? Is the question. That is the question.
What is it? Yeah, just a question. Sorry, I have to come in the mic.
You got a question?
Yeah, I got a question. A question, you keep saying good God.
Yeah.
Is the problem for us is that we've never seen good? Because, whatever you see, what scandal, the corruption in the American, US court, there's nothing, sorry, of course I'm scandal. But anyway, there's nothing, what is perfect? This is the fallen world. So how can we bring across a good God? We talk about something that we actually don't actually see the manifestation of perfection, an uncorrupt God. They keep saying the word good, but you know what I mean.
Do you want me to answer it? Do you want to answer it? No, go ahead.
I would kind of cover that in a different angle. That we do see good in the world. The world does not. We do see a lot of good acts. We do see a lot of, even if it's not necessarily from the church, people are helping people. There is love there, but it's being corrupted in the sense that it's not perfect. So when we're saying good on the level of God, we're talking about a perfect good that obviously we don't see in the world. Example: when the guy came to Jesus and says, "Teacher, good teacher, what thing can I do? What thing can I do to be saved, or can I get into heaven?" He's asking the questions, and Jesus turned to him and said, "Why do you call me good? Nobody is good except God." I know you got a great example at the back of that, which you could share. Which is the whole thing about if Jesus is saying nobody is good but God, and he's stressing Roger's point that we're in a corrupt world, and if anybody who walked the planet who could say I am good, it was Jesus. He was sinless. But he didn't want the person who's asking him the question to think that it's out of my goodness I get in, because no, it isn't. Only God is good on that level. Nobody gets in out of their own goodness. But we can't then remove it too far and say there's no good in the world, because there is good in the world. And even though there is sin, God's image still remains. We're still made in his image. It has been corrupted. Things have been twisted. Remember, evil doesn't create anything. Satan doesn't create. He can only use the stuff that is here. So all the good stuff that God did, being corrupted. But there's remnants of the good there that's still happening, but it's not at the level God wants it to be. That make sense? Did that answer your question, Roger, a bit? Okay, thank you.
And I would add, I mean, that's one of my main questions to Stephen Fry would be, how can you know what good and bad is in a world without God? The very idea of good and evil can only make sense in a reality where there's a God. Because without God, then those things can't, I can have my idea of good, you can have your idea of good, or your idea of evil, my idea of evil, but ultimately, there's nothing above us to say that that's really wrong. So what that means is, all the things that he's complaining about, the bugs eating out children's eyes, the bone cancer in children, the Holocaust, if there's no God, what basis do you have to say that's wrong? How do you know what's wrong if there's no God? That's like a whole, maybe that would be one of the
topic we need to unpick a bit.
But actually, just to say, the very fact that we can say that is absolutely wrong. Anytime, any place, doesn't matter. That's always wrong. That can only be said if there's a God. And so we may not see perfect true goodness on earth or in ourselves, but we know what true goodness and true evil are because of that sense that God's put into each human heart.
Yeah, and we could unpack that a lot more. We don't have time at the minute, but to get that understanding, it's an absolute, because if there was nothing outside of us to measure it by, my argument, your argument just comes down to who expresses it better. But then it's all relative, and then it all becomes nonsense, because who's right? We need something outside of us, as stressed beautifully there by Ian. But just to wrap up, because time's gone over, and I want us to finish the responses. When we're talking about hell, the picture of hell given sometimes is like people are there, but they don't actually want to be. Now that sounds a bit weird. Or they're not there of their own accord in the sense of, actually, I don't want God, well, you need to be somewhere. Think of it like this. If you don't want the God of the Bible, you don't want to be in the God of the Bible's heaven. Why would you want to be with him? Would you even be happy? Some people go to heaven and not be happy. It's like, this is not what I want, this is not my idea of heaven. And it's this concept which Jesus talks about in his parables, where he talks about the gnashing of teeth, when the people are thrown into the fire, and there's some scriptures like there, Matthew 13, 41 to 42, 13 to 50. And I thought about this, and it always threw me like, what do you mean the gnashing of teeth? I don't understand what you mean by that, Jesus, what does that mean? And then doing some research, I found out it's talking about, when someone's angry, and they're gnashing their teeth out of anger. That's where the idea is coming from. So it's almost like they're shaking their fist at God. They're still angry because they haven't got their own way. They're still like, what's this about? So it's not like a shaking their fist like, let me out. It's almost gets, I'm angry. And it intensifies in hell rather than diminishes. C.S. Lewis has a comment where he says, God will come up to you and say, you know what? You could either say, my will be done, or thy will be done. So it's either my way or your way. But if your way is in contravening to mine and it can't be both, one of us is going to get our way. And you're there as a man, and there's God Almighty, holy, perfect, righteous, knows everything. Who do you think is going to win in the end? So you have to remember that God knows He gave us choice. You read about that in the Bible. There's consequences that come with choice. And hell's there to serve justice in the sense of choices are there. And He knows that. It's a sad thing, but the Bible does say actually that it's not God's will that anybody should perish and go to hell. But at the same time, it makes it clear that people will be. Oops. So, we've got different responses there. About God being loving, how we responded in terms of God being eternal. Let's go to the first one. And also understanding that we need to have punishment because we get that in the world where we live. So at an eternal level, at a spiritual level, it doesn't change. There's still consequences. Yeah? So if we kind of wrap this up and go back to the question again, is hell fair? You've got different ways of answering the question. You've got different responses. So you might actually work out and say to them, it's fair because there needs to be a punishment. Now they might not take it to the next step to say, yeah, I get punishment, but I don't get the eternal part. But if they do, you could say, give some of the examples that me and Ian were talking about. Like you don't actually really understand the gravity of what you're talking about when you go against God. And walk away from the creator of life. If He created life and you walk away from Him, then what's left? Have you ever thought about that? He is the creator of life and you walk away. What is left? It's got to be death. What else is there? It's not that you're going to find a better option somewhere else. You know when you put it that simple, you know? But we still try. Because we're being corrupted, because we don't see God correctly. There's so many reasons. But we say all this to kind of get you to understand, to know how to be equipped, and to always point you back to Jesus. Because the point really is bringing people to God. Clearing away the excuses, clearing away, making the fog, and answering their questions so God can then move in and change their heart. And bring them to where they need to be. We don't save souls, God does it. But we can help to kind of clear the fogginess and the confusion. That's what Decipher is about. Yeah? So I hope that, I'll give Ian a closer comment, once I say something at the end, that's great. So I hope you've really kind of received from today. Yeah? And if you still want closure, please ask me questions after. I know people may need to go, so I do want to make it a couple line to say if you need to go, you can go. If you've got a question afterwards, please come and ask me or ask Ian. But I'm going to ask my friend to close out, please, or say last comment, and then we'll wrap up.
You know, this is a real question. People really ask this. When you get into conversations with people, this is a real question that they'll ask. And often it's personalized. I'm a good person. Would God send me to hell? And they try and put it on you. And I think, hopefully this has been helpful. Obviously there's a lot more to talk about. All of these questions, you have to bear in mind, people have been talking about this stuff for thousands of years. So there's a lot to say about it. So we're just trying to focus on certain things that might be helpful, that might generate discussion as well. But I just wanted to add to this that if you think about Christianity, we know, I mean, those of us in this room, if I were to ask you, you'd probably say Christianity is about relationship with God. It's not just religion, it's not just rituals, it's about relationship with God. It's about loving God. And so when you think about, okay, that's what Christianity is about. Heaven, this is a way you can turn it back to somebody. What is good about heaven? Heaven is good because God's there. Heaven, you know, the reason the Bible talks about Christianity in terms of a marriage, it talks about, you know, you read the book of Revelation, it's a wedding. The end of time is a wedding. At the beginning of the book, you get a divorce. At the end of the book, you get a wedding. Right? Heaven is good. The prize of heaven is unity with God.
Heaven is for the people that love Jesus. Because that is only good, that's only a prize if you love him. You know, a marriage isn't a prize for the person that doesn't love the other person. That's hell, in fact, isn't it? When someone forces, you know, at least in our culture, someone forces you into a marriage you don't want to be in, hell. Because you don't want to be with that person. Yeah? And so heaven is the most natural thing in the world for someone that loves Jesus. Because Jesus wants to give us the greatest prize that he could possibly give us, himself. And that means the only people that it makes sense to be in heaven is the bride. The Bible talks about the church as the bride. The people that want to be married to him. Absolute unity. So, you know, it doesn't matter if just you're a good person. You can be as great a person as you want. If you don't pursue relationship and love with the person that's offering you marriage, you can be as good a person as you want, but you're never connected to them. And so the only option is, okay, you don't want to be married to me, you don't want to be in unity with me, well, you're separated from me then. And so one of the most important things to remember is God doesn't actually send anybody to hell. It's a natural outcome of a life without God. And that's where that C.S. Lewis quote comes in, is everyone at the end, you know, the final day, either we will say to God, thy will be done, or he looks to us and says, okay, thy will be done. You didn't want me, then you have no place in our honeymoon, if you will, you know. Why would anyone who's not married to the husband want to be at the honeymoon? It just wouldn't make sense. They're not welcome there. And so, you know, I think hopefully this has been interesting, hopefully it's been helpful, and again, we're here to talk. And I, for one, am really looking forward to the next time. So thank you guys.
Guys, we thank you for coming. I'm kind of struggling to end it as well, if I'm honest, because there's so much more we could share and talk about. But there is time, it means we've got to do it again. Give us feedback, give us questions, share it. Facebook, Twitter, you know, WhatsApp, whatever. Let people know, because we want to get this out there. We want to talk about more topics and really get people just engrossed in this stuff, you know, and understanding it and helping them with their faith. So thank you for coming. I'm just going to pray to close.